when I was a little boy, I and after the orphanage, when I came back, I never knew what my parents looked like. So I'm going back before the war, and my father gave his neighbor, a non-Jewish man, gave his neighbor a package of little pictures. You know, the old pictures, they were like 2 by 3, whatever they were. And he told this man, a neighbor, if after the war, if anybody is alive from my family, please give it to them. And this man did, and he gave it to a member of my family. So therefore now I'm jumping back, and I came out of the orphanage at 7 years old, 8, 9, 10, and I don't know what my parents look like, and in my child head I'm thinking, I've heard that maybe it happened that Jewish people came back from the concentration camps, and maybe they were mental and they survived, and therefore I had this habit of looking at all the men that I saw when I was walking on the streets, because members of my family, the few that remained, told me that I looked like my father. So I was looking for my father, and I looked at all the men that I met on the streets. Naturally, I never found my father because he was murdered by the Nazis in concentration camp. So I'm mentioning this here because I never knew what he looked like. And then one day when I went to visit one of my aunts, one of my mother's sister. There were only 3 remaining from a family there were 11 children in my mother's family, and only 3 remained after the war. And I asked her, "Where are your pictures?" And she said, "Oh, there's a big box over there." And then I went to the book and I started to look. And then I said, "Boy, it's funny, this man looks like me." And she said, "Yeah, that's your father." And I should have a glass of water. Anyway, so all of a sudden I saw my father, and then I went a little bit further, and then she said, and there's your mother, you know. And I couldn't believe it. And I said, "Why didn't you show them to me? Why didn't you give them a picture?" "Oh, I forgot, we were busy, blah blah blah."
What year is this, Alex?
I was 10. Thanks. I was 10 years old, and so I was born in 1939, so it was 49. And anyway, so I saw.
So that was the first time you saw your parents' picture.
Yeah.
What about that neighbor who had that packet of pictures?
Yeah, he gave, right after the war, he gave all the pictures to this particular aunt, because he knew all the members of the family.
Right.
And she never bothered to pay attention, and she never bothered to show it. I don't know why. Anyway, they didn't care for pictures like I did. I don't know why I cared for pictures, but I did because I was searching for my family. Anyway, so when it happened, I said to her, "Oh, I'm going to take this." And she said, "No, you can't. They're mine." And I said, "Never mind. They're yours. They're mine now." And so I just took them. And then I went to a place, and I had them developed to make them larger, and I gave those pictures to all the members of my family, to all my cousins. I had 5 cousins, and there were a lot of pictures of all the members of my family, people that I didn't know, of course, because there were aunts and uncles and cousins and what have you, and so I just wanted to tell you what happened because of pictures, because of what you just said 2 minutes ago.
So I take you back in a moment. You were born in 1939 where?
In Brussels, Belgium.
In Brussels, Belgium. And
Yeah.
and what point were you separated from your parents?
Okay. When I was 2 years old, my father arranged with a Belgian woman to place me with a Catholic family. So basically, from that moment on, I had to forget that even though at 2 years old, I wouldn't know the difference between being a Jew and being a Catholic, but I was told that I was a Catholic. And from that moment on, from 2 years old till 7, I was known as a Catholic boy. And so my father made the arrangements with this woman. He paid her, and then I went to Belgian people. But the Germans told the Belgian population, like they did in every other countries that they had, that if they would be caught helping Jews, like you just mentioned now, they would be taken with their whole family and they would be sent to a concentration camp. So these people were afraid for their own family. So they were afraid for their whole family to go to concentration camps. So instead of that, they would bring me back home, and therefore I went from families to families from the age of 2 to 4 to at least a dozen different families. And again, I didn't know any better. I thought I was going from families to families, and they were nice with me, and then they brought me back home. At the age of 4, when I was brought home by one of these families, there was a woman sitting in the kitchen, and my father said, "I'm going to introduce you to this woman, and she'll take you on a long trip." And he introduced me to her as Mademoiselle André. Mademoiselle André was a very nice woman, and there's a big story about her, about resistance, and I'll tell you about this in a little while. Then I asked my father, "Where is Mama?" And he said, she's in the bedroom, but don't disturb her because she's not feeling well." And so I ran to the bedroom, and even though that we didn't have any locks on the door, I couldn't open the door, and I didn't know why. And it bothered me that I couldn't see my mother. And then all of a sudden, Mademoiselle André stood up and she says, "We have to leave." And then my father came and he hugged me and kissed me, and then he said goodbye. And basically, that was the last time that my father ever kissed me. And we went down and we walked down the street, and we went towards a little truck, and then she just drove off. She put me in the back seat. And all I could remember was that I never said goodbye to my mother. And that stayed with me for a long, long time. After 4.5 days, why 4.5 days? Really, from Brussels to Namur, where the orphanage was, basically at normal time it would have taken 2 hours. But because the Nazis were all over, she had to go all around to try to hide from the Nazis, and there we were. After 4.5 days, we reached the orphanage. So I'm in the orphanage, and things are taking its toll, and I stayed from the age of 4 to 6.5. 6.5. Liberation came. I'm not going to tell you all the stories of what happened during at the orphanage. It's kind of long, and 6.5 liberation comes, and nobody comes for us. And there I was in that orphanage with my cousin, who I thought was my sister, because my father again arranged that his niece, my cousin, would be there. Why did he arrange it that way? And that our names were changed so that Annie, my cousin, became my sister. In case that our parents would be taken away, we would stay together, the siblings would stay together, and we would remain together as brother and sister instead of cousins. So 6.5, nobody comes for us. We didn't know what would happen. Then after that, we stayed in the orphanage for another 6 months, and then we were brought back from Namur by bus to Brussels. And the plan was that if nobody came for us, and they didn't know what to do with all these orphans, that we were going to be sent to a kibbutz in Palestine. And what happened was that instead of that, when we were brought back in Brussels, we were transferred from the orphanage to the Red Cross, and the Red Cross wrote all of our names on long sheets of paper, and then they placed all these sheets of paper on the telephone poles around Brussels, with the hope that a member of the family would find us. And as a matter of fact, my uncle, my father's brother, found us, and then he brought us home. At that time, Annie, who I thought was my sister, really my cousin, her father just came back from the concentration camp from Buchenwald, where he had spent 16 months. And then Annie was introduced to her father, and then she called him Papa. And then, because Annie was my sister in the orphanage, then I called him Papa, and he didn't say anything. During that time, his wife, my aunt, was recuperating in a hospital in Copenhagen because something had happened, and then she was sent back to Belgium, and then basically she came the very first night, and she came and her husband said, Alex doesn't know anything about his parents, but he's calling me Papa, and he's sleeping now with Annie in the bedroom. And then she went into the bedroom to see her daughter, and the noise woke me up, and then she told her daughter that she was her mother. Annie was my sister, therefore she must be my mother. And then when she came close to me, I said, Bonjour, Maman. And I thought she was my mother. And it stayed that way until after the war. I was not in very good shape, and the doctors told my aunt that for my sake, maybe I should go to the sea, and the fresh air of the sea would be good for me. So both my aunt and uncle, they just came back from concentration camp. She came back from Ravensbrück. He came back from Buchenwald. They didn't have any money, and therefore they couldn't take me to the sea. But they went in Brussels, and they found one of my aunts, my mother's sister, who was going to the sea with her husband and their son, my cousin Joe. So they asked permission if I could go with them. They said yes, and then there I went to the sea with them. Within a couple of days, there was a castle contest, and for children. But before you were able to do your little castle, you had to buy a jar of Nescafe. I didn't have any money, so I wasn't allowed to enter the contest. My cousin Joe, he had money, so he was allowed. So he made his little castle, and it wasn't very nice. Anyway, I was being a little bit jealous that I wasn't allowed to do it, and I went to my cousin Joe's castle, and I broke it with my foot, and he was mad, and he came in, he punched me in the nose, and I was bleeding, and I said what all kids would say, I'll tell my mother on you. And that's when he blurted out, it wasn't very nice, when he blurted out that point, he said, your mother is not your mother, and your father is not your father, and your parents are dead. And I couldn't believe it, and I said, no, it's not true, they're at home, and I just left them a few days ago. No, they're not your parents are dead. Then I lost it, and I ran away, and I sat on the beach. Lucky for me, the police found, the gendarmes found me sitting on the beach, and they brought me back home. And I went to his mother, and I said, is it true what Joe said about my parents? And she said, I'll take you home. And she drove me home. And I went to my mom, who I thought was my mom, and I said, "What's going on?" You know,
You were like 8 years old then?
I
7
was
years old?
7 years old, and I said, "What? Where are my parents? What happened to my parents?" And then slowly but surely, she took my hand and she told me. Years passed. I'm in Vancouver, and it's 2010. And we're going on the March of the Living. And I didn't want to tell all this to you guys on Thursday because I had quite a week this week. I spoke to 4 different schools simply because there were two survivors that were sick. One was Lillian and the other one you don't know. Anyway, and couldn't speak, so for whatever reason I replaced them, and I think that I spoke too many times, so I didn't want to share all that with you because I thought that you would see a lot of things by yourself, you know, and experience your own experiences. But I'm here, and then this young man here is bugging me to tell you this. And here
Encouraging.
and here I am in 2010, and again it's too much to tell for the whole story, but I'm summarizing everything that I'm sharing with you. And I knew what was coming because I had seen the itinerary, and I knew where we were going, and finally I knew we were going to come to Auschwitz, where both my parents were. So then I tell the story about my father, what happened to him, and what really happened to him in a nutshell was that he was supposed to work in Auschwitz number 1, but he was suffering a flat feet, and when you stand on one spot all day long, you know, when they were calling all the people by their numbers that they were tattooed, it took a long time. He got weak. He couldn't work. In Auschwitz, there was no room for weak people, and therefore he was murdered. And then my mother, that was in Auschwitz number 2, Birkenau, was on the other side, and she was with her sister. She met one of her sisters that was already there. And in the morning there were men with white coats that were in charge of the triage. The triage meant that these people would make the decision of who would work and who would not. And naturally, all the women that had babies and children automatically were sent to the left, and the elderly were sent to the left, and even the women that the Nazis felt that they couldn't do a day's work just by a flick of the hand, they were sent to the left. My mother was sent to the right. And her sister was sent to the left. And my mother turned around to the lady that was behind her in the lineup of all the women that were going to go to work. She knew the 2 sisters, she knew the whole family. She came from Belgium also. And she says, "Look, my sister's over there, what should I do?" And that lady unfortunately said, "You do what you want." And my mother looked at her sister, who was crying, and she just went over to her sister, and then her sister actually said to her, "You shouldn't be here. Go back. Why did you come? Go back." And my mother thought about it, and she wanted to go back, and she was stopped. She wasn't allowed to go. And therefore, my mother and her sister, hand in hand, followed all these other women, and they went into the shower room. So now we're in 2010. and we're in that shower room. And we're April 2010, and it's cold, and we're freezing. And a lot of the students were told to bring their scarves and gloves, and actually they forgot. And then we had to give them ours. And they're crying. And we had to forget that we shouldn't cry for ourselves because we had to be there for the students. And I knew what happened there. And I dreaded the thought of this thing happening. And in that room, they told us things that I didn't know, that I had never known before. And they said that they told all the prisoners, of course, that they were going to take a shower, and they told them to get undressed. We were in that room in 2010, in April 2010, and they were in that room in December 1943, and we were freezing, dressed up in winter clothes. So you could imagine. You could imagine how cold it must have been in 43. And in that room they actually said that the Nazis had placed the cans of poison above the shower heads to murder all these people. And they even told us in that room that the poison wasn't even good enough to do the job immediately, that it took more than 20 minutes. To murder all these people. And when they locked all the doors and the prisoners had come to take all their clothes away, and then they locked the doors, and then when the women basically looked up the shower heads and were hoping that the water would come down, and it didn't, they got frantic and they got hysterical, and apparently they told us that they were running all over the place, and they actually scratched the walls with their fingernails. When I heard this, I turned around and I caressed the walls. That's when I decided that I thought of my mother, that I'd never said goodbye to her. And I said goodbye. I said, au revoir, maman, in that room. It was the first and last time that I ever said that to her. When I was 4 years old, there was a woman that my father introduced me, and it was Mademoiselle André, and with her, he introduced me that I was going to go to the orphanage in Belgium. So we were living in Brussels, and we were going to Namur in the orphanage. But because it was in the middle of the war, we had to go around, and that little trip of 2 hours lasted 4.5 days. So I was with that woman, and we roamed around for the 4.5 days, and she drove a little truck. And then after that, we had to walk, look for food, and we finally reached the orphanage. But before I went to the orphanage, and before I left home, my father hugged me and he kissed me, and little did I know that was the last time that it happened. But before that, I asked, where is Mama? And then he told me she was in the bedroom, and I ran and I wanted to open the door, and yet we didn't have any locks on the door, and yet it was locked, and I didn't know why. Later on, I found out from Mademoiselle André, because I met Mademoiselle André after the war, and she told me that my mother was holding the doorknob, and yeah, and she didn't let go, because if she opened the door, then I wouldn't be here today. And so she saved my life. But in my mind, as a child, I never said goodbye to my mother. So now we're back in 2010. We're in that room where my mother and her sister were, waiting for the showers, and obviously there was no showers. There's no water, because the Nazis had placed cans of poison above the shower heads. And they told us, I don't know if you recall, but they told us in the room itself that the women got hysterical because they didn't see the water. And they ran towards the walls and they scratched the walls with their fingernails. And therefore I turned around and I caressed the walls, basically to see if I could still feel the fingernails of the scratches that these women did, and maybe my mother did the same thing. And as I caressed it, I said, "Au revoir, maman." And that was because I never said goodbye when I was a kid, and so I was able to say it. Yeah. So that was it.
Let me ask you a question. When you it's a heartbreaking experience when you said goodbye to your mother in the gas chamber. Did you gain something from it? Is the question. I know that it's mixed, but what did you gain from it?
What I gained from it was that I was able to say goodbye, because it was no use saying goodbye in any other places. But there, when I knew that's where the last place where she was, that's when I wanted to say goodbye. And it just came. It came in my mind that that's where I wanted to say it. Yeah.
And were you planning on doing that before? It happened spontaneously.
No. It was. What resonated with me was the fact that these women were so they wanted to live, even to the last minute they wanted to live, and they wanted to escape, and there was no way to escape, and yet they went and they scratched the walls with their fingernails. It was as if it was one way of saying, I want to do something. And it was strong, and I felt that, and I always thought that my mother was a very strong woman. All my life I knew that she was a strong woman, and that she just didn't give up, even to the last minute. She must have done something.
So those scratches showed you that.
Yeah.
So the fact that you got to say goodbye, does that give you some kind of feeling of closure?
Well, in many ways, because I'd never experienced that before, and that was the first time that I did experience that in that concentration camp, in that shower room.
The former gas chamber.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just so that it was ultimately although it's hard to use the word positive, it was a positive thing for you to have done that, because it gave you that opportunity to do so.
In many ways it was, yeah. It was hard, but finally I was able to say goodbye to her, and I was able to have that feeling, It's special. She was, I wanted to know my mother and I didn't, and so it was hard. We arrived in Montreal when I was 11 years old. Stayed in Montreal till I was about 20, and then decided to leave Montreal 2021, and then decided to leave Montreal, went to Vancouver, and got married, a boy, 3 grandchildren. And last month, for the first time, I was invited at my granddaughter's school and she's 15 years old, and spoke to the whole school. But what was amazing was that she introduced me. Did a super job. Love love that little girl. We have 3 grandchildren, 2 boys and a girl. And in them I see my strength. And like you said before, Hitler didn't get us. He got my grandparents, he got my parents. He had the majority of my family. But I have 3 grandchildren because I survived. Because people were kind and saved me. That woman that drove me from Brussels to Namur to the orphanage was Mademoiselle André. And when I was about 23, 24, when I went back for the first time to Belgium, I told my cousins, you know, I've been trying to find the address of the orphanage and I can't find it. The name of it was the Château de Solière in Namur. But the name changed and they turned it into a mental institution of all places. But before that, before I found out all that information, one of my cousins said, I'd like to, if you're going to be here tomorrow, I'd like to introduce you to a woman, maybe she would be able to help you. So we went to this woman, and little did I know that it was quite a hectic afternoon. And when I came in, she held my hand and she asked me to sit down beside her. She had a beautiful home, and her husband was a lawyer, and in Belgium a lot of the lawyers, they work in their homes, they have their office there. And it's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful office. There was books all over the place. Then I sat beside her, and then she caressed my hand. And then in front of her, she had rectangular booklets. And then she asked me if I recognized her, if I remember her. And I said, no, I'm sorry. And then she kissed me on the cheeks. She looked familiar, but I couldn't remember her. And then she says, I'm Mademoiselle André. And then she told me what she did during the war. She, with 19 other women, non-Jewish women, were working for the Belgian resistance. And their job was to hide Jewish kids anywhere and everywhere, in the orphanage, and with the nuns, with the priests, all over the place, with families, anywhere that they could. But the object was to try to remember where were all those Jewish kids, because they were afraid that the Jewish kids would not know that they were Jewish, like I didn't know I was Jewish. And then she said, one by one, all of these women that were with her in the group were captured by the Gestapo were tortured, were murdered, and she's the only one that survived. Mademoiselle Andre was the only one that survived. And there were things written about her in both in Belgium and in France and in Israel.
Yad Vashem?
In Yad Vashem, yes, yes.
What year was this meeting, by the way? You reunited with, what year was that?
Give or take approximately maybe 15 years ago. I'm guessing around 15 years ago. And then she told me that, like I said, she was the only one that survived. But what resonated so much with me was the fact that she told me that she saved, that they saved, not she saved, that the group saved over 4,000 Jewish kids. When I went on that visit to Belgium, I brought a book from Vancouver, actually to give to one of my cousins, and I asked them permission to take that book, and I gave it to Mademoiselle Andre, and she came. When I went to her house, she, in Belgium they have these big armoires, from the floor right up to the top of the ceiling, big house, and she opened it up. There were books from all over the world.
Books from people who had...
Books from young people like myself that were saved by her, and found out about it and came to visit her. And she had books. While I was there, as I was almost leaving, she introduced me to a man that was my age, that came from Israel, and he actually came from Belgium. He was born in Belgium, I should say, and she introduced me, and it was the first time I met him, and
He was one of the 1,000. Can I ask you, going back a bit, when you were in the war, and your father gave you over to Mademoiselle, how does she pronounce your name?
Andre.
You at that point in time, did you realize these were your parents, and then you forgot later?
Yeah. I guess I was too young, and what I think the way that I could explain it to myself, I wanted to have a father and I wanted to have a mother so badly, because all this time that I was placed with people and actually and in the orphanage, I didn't have any parents, and we knew right from the start, right when we were kids, that there was something wrong. How come we don't have any parents? It's not a natural thing for a kid not to have a mother or a father.
So when did these memories come back of that scene when your mother, that door was locked?
Okay.
Yeah.
What happened was that when I went to visit, I never knew this what happened. And when I went to visit Mademoiselle Andre, she asked me if I remembered that I went to try to open the door and that I couldn't open it. And then she said, "Do you know why?" I said, "No, I don't know. I couldn't understand, because we didn't have such things as locking doors, or we didn't have that. And how come I couldn't?" And I was trying to open and I couldn't. And that's when she's the one that told me, because it was your mother that was holding it back, and she didn't want you to see. She didn't want to see you because she was afraid she was going to keep you. And instead of that, she let you go, and she saved your life.
So when Mademoiselle Andre reminded you that story, did you actually remember it then?
No,
So you're getting it from her.
I got it from her, because I didn't know. I couldn't understand when I was a kid why it didn't open, and then it slipped my mind, and then she reminded me of what happened, and told me basically the fact that it was my mother that did that.
So you can now recall the scene. The scene you remember.
There's no question about it. Yeah.
But you didn't know what was going on at the time.
No, and so.
And going back on the march in 2010, when you had a chance to say goodbye to your mother, did that give you a sense of closure, some kind of comfort that you got a chance to do that?
Yes and no. You know, it was like a real mixed. It was a mixed feeling. Like again, you know, I felt like having a lot of emotions. I felt like I never really cried. Like I wanted to cry because the students were there all around. They were always so close with us, you know. I mean, and they were crying, and therefore you didn't want to sob. So you held it back. I held it back, and until I was able to finally get into my room, and thank goodness. For whatever reason, I got a private room, and so then I was able to let it go. But in front of the kids, I didn't want to do that because they themselves were going through their own personal emotions of being in so many different concentration camps. But in Auschwitz, for whatever reason, was the worst. You know, there was a lot of emotion in all of the camps. But when it came to Auschwitz, maybe it was the fact that we knew it was one of the worst one. Maybe it was because of all different reasons. And
so when you got back to your room and you let it go, was that the first time you really?
Yeah.
That was the first time you.
Then I allowed myself to let it go, and
that was the very first time. So from that standpoint, it was a good thing for you to have done that, I guess.
Yeah, and then I went for a walk and went by myself, and I nearly lost myself. I was just walking and thinking about during the March of the Living. The March of the Living for me, you know. So, you know, sometimes in your life, you know, there's maybe one or twice or two things that you may think that are special, and if you're lucky to know that you could make sense of these few times in your life that there is something special. Well, March of the Living for me was this. It was special. It was special because, first of all, there was two emotions. One, I was going because I wanted to remember my parents, and I knew that that's where they were murdered. The second thing was, even though that I'm not religious or anything like that, because I have a tough time trying to get it around my head that, like, where was he, you know, and how could he allow all that to happen, but whatever it means. But I was proud to be a Jew. And I was proud to be there and amongst all the students and the other people. And I never felt that anywhere. For the longest time before, for many years before, I stayed away from Jewishness. And at the same time, by staying away, it bugged me that I stayed away. Because I didn't want to, you know, people, as soon as you tell them where you're from, and they know it's Europe, and you were born in 1939, and what happened to you, and I didn't want to to share that with people until one day where I was living in North Vancouver, there was a man that was a newspaper man that would say all sorts of things. He would literally say things like the Holocaust didn't exist. He was saying that maybe it was an exaggeration, the types, and that really bothered me so much. And then all of a sudden, when I used to go and visit my aunt in Montreal, I would go to this store to buy her a gift that came from Israel. The woman that was in charge of that owned the store was a child survivor. She recognized my accent and she asked me where I was born, and I told her in Belgium, and before you know, she wanted me to join the child survivors group, and I said no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to get involved with things like that. And she insisted, and every year I would go back to buy another present for my aunt by visiting her, and then she insisted that I join the child survivors group. And little did I know that all of a sudden I heard that there were other Jewish people like myself that were child survivors who told their stories. Then I went home and I started to scribble all the things because my story is way too long, and so I had to shorten it up. And then I said, can I speak maybe to a school one day? And then they arranged it, and little did I know, all of a sudden, I know you're not gonna believe it, but I'm a very shy person, and the very first time that I spoke to in a school to 400 students. I couldn't believe it. I never spoke in front of anyone, and here I am. And it just baffled me to see all those students interested in what I was sharing with them, and now then I became the president of that child survivors group, only because nobody else wants to do it.
Does it give you a sense of hope when the young people listen to you?
I think so. I think so. I mean, I've been speaking now for the past 25 years. We've been together for 28 years in the child survivors group, and here we are. We're 25 people, and we come from so many different countries, and we speak different languages, but we're really a group of brothers and sisters. I mean, we have so much. We have little in common, and yet so much in common. And a few are religious. Most of us are not religious. And most of us come from all the different types of, they go to different shuls. Some don't go ever to any shuls. And we're a different kind of a group. And yet we're together. And
So like Anita Eckstein in Toronto, among others.
yeah, I know her very well. I used to go to many child survivors conferences, and I saw her. She's from Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know her very well. Lillian and I used to go quite often to conferences, and so we met her, and we met thousands of others. And
One last question, because I know it's late. What is the many lessons? What's the most important thing you want the young people to learn from their experience on the march?
there's so much. I mean, you see, it's a different kind of a group here than all the groups that I usually speak to. They're Jewish kids,
Mm-hmm.
and Jewish students. I mean, the way that you just talked this morning, they know all that. They've experienced all that. They have it at home. I mean, for other students, I would say, to try to get along, get along with each other, and especially when I go to another school, like I there's pockets of East Indian students, Chinese students, white kids, black kids, yellow kids. You're all, everybody's different, and they don't have a what you have. You're all Jewish, and you feel the same way, and you feel you feel what's happening, and you're going on the March of the Living because maybe you have a grandparent, or maybe you that was involved in as a survivor. So it's different, and yet all the things that you've said to all the kids this morning, it's so important. I wish sometimes you would write a little bit more about them,
Okay.
and share them.
Add it to my list.
Yeah.
So-
Anyways, best of luck to all of you, and thank you for letting me say 3 words.
Anyways, I just want to conclude by thanking both of our survivors here today.
Let me just add a word,
Sure.
because Alex and I have been in this group for probably, 20 years or more?
Yeah.
And for the last few years, he's really been holding the group together. He does so much for us, for everyone in that group, that really without him, it probably would have fallen apart by now. So it's this endless amount of energy and care that he dedicates. People who are alone and don't have partners or family, he'll always either call them or email them with many messages of encouragement. Anyone who gets sick, Alex is always there for them. And he's been amazing.
Well, I think we all think both of you have been amazing examples of courage and resilience and bravery. So, yashkach to you all.